Welcome to North Node, the yoga and astrology podcast. I'm Becky, a yoga teacher, astrologist, and businesswoman.
And I'm Laura, founder of Soul Sanctuary Studios, yoga teacher trainer, and wellness coach and consultant. In this podcast, we'll be diving into down-to-earth but deep soul conversations.
We'll explore how you can connect and stay on purpose with your true north alignment through the transformative lenses of yoga and astrology.
Each episode is designed to inspire and guide you on your own journey towards self-discovery, self-love, and personal growth. We'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. Your support will help us reach more listeners who are looking for insightful discussions and meaningful connection.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
Okay, so welcome back. This week's episode, we are talking about appearance. And this is obviously a really big topic and there's lots that feeds into it. So far what we've come up with on this is perfectionism, also attachment. We've spoken before about a fear of death, but then considering, fun as well and the lightness of life. So we're going to try and kind of look at it from all angles and see where we land through this discussion. So Beck, what are your first thoughts on appearance these days and what's going on in the world with appearance?
Well, I think we're so obsessed with appearance, right? And I think to get straight to the point is because we are so rooted, especially in the West, in perfectionism. And I think when we break perfectionism down, which I'm sure you're going to do in a moment, it ties into that deeper fear really, which is the fear of rejection, that if we aren't perfect, we won't be accepted or loved. And we've kind of talked about that in some of the other episodes that we've done. And I feel like we're going to go much deeper in that today. For me, there are a couple of things that underpin this thing of perfectionism and appearance that tie in together. And the first one is an over-identification with the physical aspect of the body. And maybe we'll go into that a little bit more as we move through this podcast today. And then the other two things, which I think we'll also go into more, are an obsession in the West with looking younger. And that is so tied into appearance, especially for women. I think it's, more seen as acceptable for men to age and they look distinguished. And that same belief system is not carried over to women. So, through that whole thing, really, you can see the imbalance of the genders. And then not only that, the kind of capitalist society we live in values money above everything else. And so there's been this multi-billion-pound beauty industry developed by men predominantly to feed into this whole system. So I think there's a lot to it. What do you think, Laura? Tell me about your thoughts around perfectionism.
Yeah, I think perfectionism is at the root of a lot of this. And we have spoken about this before. I think it was in connection and feeling connected to self or feeling enough. And I think that for me is where it comes from. I mean, my personal experience with perfectionism, which is why I kind of feel passionate about it, is about feeling like you need to be perfect to be loved or accepted, right? And my dad had some pretty conventional views about, blondes being more attractive and thinner being better. And I just really inherited those on a really subconscious level. Like I didn't know it at the time. I should have seen it. I mean, we said before, I was the one getting highlights at school and, I just, was very, very appearance focused and attached to appearance at quite a young age. And like I said before, like maybe that's led me to kind of come to some realizations a bit earlier, which is great, I suppose. And then trying to find some sort of balance with it. So this sense, perfectionism is the idea that we have to feel as though we need to be perfect in order to feel loved or accepted, i.e. good enough. And that means that we feel like we need to look perfect, we've got to achieve in work, be the perfect mum, be the perfect wife, all these different things. And it can maximize and minimize in different areas of your life depending on, your influences. So what happens is when we have that, we have these coping mechanisms. So we're constantly trying to fill this void of not feeling enough, because really that's what it is. Like when you're a perfectionist, ultimately you don't feel enough as you are without doing those things. So that's kind of the root of it, is not feeling enough in some way. Good enough, thin enough, pretty enough, whatever it, just not feeling enough. And what we're trying to do is just feel enough as we are. In other words, self-acceptance, right? Peacefulness, accept ourselves just as we are without all this other stuff that goes on. And there's lots of different ways that we fill that void of not feeling enough. And that doesn't have to play out in an appearance way. Often it does. So you see people, today not feeling pretty enough, not feeling young enough, not feeling thin enough. So we have a lot of things like Botox going on, cosmetic surgery, but also loads of eating disorders. This is all quite common stuff now, which is so sad, because really what it's saying is that so many people, most people are not feeling enough just as they are. And have been trained somehow that you're only enough if you are X, Y, Z. And that just puts this huge pressure on to be all of those things, but none of that is really true. And we see this through, maybe overeating, because ultimately what it is, it's this lack of satisfaction, like a lack of contentment. And we can see that with this overeating. So people just comfort eating to feel content, to feel full. And Deepak Chopra does amazing work on this. And he says, what are you really hungry for? Because we're not really eating because we're hungry. And this can come back to our episode on connection. We've lost that proprioception, interoception. Do I feel hungry? Am I eating because I'm hungry? What do I really feel here? Or am I feeling not content? Am I feeling unhappy? Am I not feeling enough in some way? And I'm just trying to feel full and content. So we see that with the overeating, and often that leads to these kind of cycles of then gym addiction, because it's almost punishment for the overeating, or maybe it's the shopping addiction, because it's, just trying to feel good enough, trying to feel better, competitive, keep up with the Joneses, all that, because we don't feel enough. And we see this with men, taking steroids, that like feeling like we need to be bigger, feeling like we need to be more attractive, more masculine, stronger, just not feeling enough, just as we really are. And sometimes other addictions like drugs and alcohol come into this. And I think more of that comes from this sense of actually just trying to distract yourself and kind of press eject on this world, because it's too painful being here and not feeling enough. It's too painful living in this world where when you don't feel enough, often you feel anxious constantly, because everything's a threat to that perfectionism. And that can just be exhausting and just pretty a hideous way to live. And so, let's drink because then we can numb ourselves from it, or let's take drugs so we can eject ourselves from that situation. So there's loads of compensatory behaviors that come from not feeling enough. And I think appearance is just one of those. And that's really kind of how I see it. And I guess insecurity is a word. I don't really like that word because it kind of puts blame on the person doing it. I don't think it's anyone's fault other than cultural influence that we feel like we have to do this stuff. I just feel a bit of a sadness, really, that we feel like we need to do it and we can't accept ourselves more just as we are. So I guess that's the kind of psychology side of it. And then there's so many different sides of this coin. So, we could then look at the health of it. Yoga has got a lot of philosophy around this, and also Ayurveda, which is something we talk about on the teacher training. But I mean, from those topics we've spoken about, Beck, what kind of stands out for you? What do you think is important to share on that?
I think this is a really hard subject to talk about without coming across as judgmental. So I do want to prelude everything we say with like everything I'm going to say. And I know what you're going to say as well is not ever coming from a place of judgment. It's coming from a place of love and of my own experience. And you know what? I think when I found yoga and really started learning some of the teachings, which we teach on the teacher training, but we also talk about some of these principles in the classes that we teach as well. And I think the main one that really like hit me in the heart was ahimsa, which is like this practice of non-harm. And so for me, anything we do with our appearance should also encompass this theory of ahimsa and non-harm. And then if you go deeper with that, I feel like it's the kind of the vibration behind doing whatever you're doing. So we were talking about this before the call, in terms of like things like getting your nails done. Like, how is that different from Botox or steroids, or, you know, even more extreme cosmetic surgery that, you know, people are getting done? And for me, it's the vibration from which you go and seek out this treatment or whatever you're going to have done. And I think that weaves into non-attachment. So for me, when I have my nails done, it's not from an absolute need to have my nails done. That is a list of like 50 things long that I need to do in order to make myself feel good about myself. It's more about like honoring that feminine energy and doing something for myself from that angle, really. And women have done that since the beginning of time, like honored their feminine beauty. And then I think there's a very different vibration than going to have something done because you don't feel good enough as you are. And it's a list of 50 things long every month or every 3 months that you need to have done, or daily even, you know, in order to feel like you're good enough, that you look good enough. And of course, like, there's the whole thing around actually the way you look is the least important thing about you. You know, you look at your best friend and you don't, I mean, you might appreciate like they've had their hair done or something like that, but that's not why you go for lunch with your best friend. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. To stare at their eyebrows or something.
You know, we laugh at that, but I think there are, and I have had friendships in my lifetime which can be quite superficial, in the sense that, you know, the inner circle, that you want to be part of that circle, whatever. And this is the thing, is I think when you can start living in truth a bit more, and maybe you let those friendships go and you let needing to look a certain way go and all of that, like, it's a much freer way to be. And, you know, I echo you completely. There is, you know, as humans we judge, so I can't sit here and go there's no judgment, because we're all human, but it comes from a place of compassion. And also, I think what's really important to say is, at any point that I'm judging anyone, like we've spoken about before, that for me is a red flag for me to do some work. That's me going, oh, hang on a minute, what are you so scared of that's bringing up stuff in you here, that's bringing up that energy? So that's really important. If, I guess the flip side of this is, if you feel yourself judging other people for having that stuff done, you know, that's that like 1 finger forward, 3 finger back thing. Is like, look at yourself and go, hang on a sec, like, why am I reacting to this? What am I scared of? You know, and if it can come from compassion, then that's going to really help that other person wherever they are. And like we've said before, Beck, is like, you know, we're both very focused on inner work and there like a lot of depth, and maybe that isn't that person's journey in this lifetime. So as much as we can see that and potentially judge and go, like, oh, you know, I'm sad for you that you're insecure, that you feel that you need to do that, whether it feels really worthy, you know, the other side of it is like, hang on a sec, who are you to think that they're on the same journey as you, right? This is their journey, and meeting them where they are with love and compassion, because they're teaching us something just by being that way. So yeah, it does. It comes with love, and it comes with a lot of learning on both sides of the coin. I had a really interesting conversation with a friend not so long ago about steroids, and it was eye-opening for me, because I had been quite judgmental on that, and I had seen steroids as a bit of a shortcut, or cheating really, and that's not a nice word to say, but that is how I felt about it. And this guy was saying to me, he was like, hang on a sec, you know, this is like, let's call it modern technology. Let's call it an advance, where if a guy is like suffering because he has lower testosterone, he can now take testosterone to make himself feel better. What's wrong with that? You know, and he said to me, you know, there wasn't washing machines once. Do you use a washing machine? You making your life easier? You happy because you've got a washing machine? Like, what's the difference? It didn't really ring true with me, but I totally saw his perspective. And what it made me do was look at myself and go, why have you got such an issue with this, babe? Like, you know, and I think ironically that came back down to my perfectionism, which I do love running every day. I'm not sure if I love that because I genuinely love it or because it gets an effect that I like. It's really hard, I think, to hear that truth, our own voice these days. But as far as I'm aware, I love it. And health is always my bottom line on that. Like, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel healthy. It makes me feel strong. The days I don't want to do it, I don't do it. But the days I do, which is most days, I do it. And maybe there's something in me that's going, hang on a sec, like, I'm so committed and disciplined to staying well and staying healthy and staying fit. Like, I could sit and eat chocolate all day long and then take it some sort of medicine to make me look better. That feels like cheating. Maybe that's because I'm too hard on myself, So it's really also the other side of the coin is about looking at where you're coming from when you're observing this, I think is really, really important. But the bottom line for me is health on all of it. And I think, like we were laughing today, I'm sat here in pink and having had my nails done. And usually I'm in black and grey and haven't had my nails done since before I had Lenny. And I was like, the irony of that. But you know what was so interesting? I got them done because we're going on holiday. I don't like it when they look chipped. It makes me feel like dirty for some weird reason. Who knows where that comes from? And I walked around, I was like, yeah, this feels really nice. And I was like, isn't that interesting? Like, there's a real, where's the balance? Where's the because when I had the babies, I feel like I lost myself. I had no time to even blow dry my hair. Mascara wasn't even a thing, right? And it was like pajamas most of the time. And to be honest, I felt pretty crap. And yes, I could have done the work to go, feel enough as you are, even when you look like crap, right? And there was a lot of that going on. It's forced because I didn't have the time. But there's also the flip side that life is really short and it's nice to feel nice. So I think where I kind of landed with that was this attachment piece, this idea that kind of do whatever you want, but don't feel like you need to do that stuff. Do it because you want to do it, experiment, whatever. Life is here to learn. But the minute you sense yourself feeling like, no, I need it rather than I want it, I think that's the red flag to go, well, okay, hang on a sec. Maybe this is getting a little bit out of control. And I mean, at least from a yoga perspective, what we talk about in that is, it's in the kleshas, but it's also in the sutras. So it's Raja, which is this attachment. And specifically attachment to pleasure. So it's this idea that we're wanting this happiness, we're wanting to feel happy. And the problem with that is this craving. So it's the idea that, well, then when that's gone, then you're experiencing suffering, which they're calling dukkha. So it's this idea that actually true happiness arises completely independent of any of these external circumstances. Actually, interestingly, external of mental circumstances too. So it's this light of the self, which is this shining, unhindered of the mind, unobstructed by attachment. And it can't be created, so no external force can create it and nothing can destroy it. And that's what's called our true nature. So we have this true nature of happiness. And when we're thinking that we're having to do stuff or get stuff or look a certain way to experience happiness, which is really maybe joy or something a bit more fleeting, then that's a confusion of the mind, right? That's just an untruth. And so I think it's about attachment. I mean, it's experiencing life, but not feeling as though we need those things to be happy, and realizing that that is just our true nature if we could strip everything else away.
Yeah, and to kind of touch on something you said, about if it makes you feel good, then do it. And I think, yeah, that is, your inner compass has to be the guiding force. And I think it again, it depends on the depth of your journey. For me, yeah, your inner compass is your guiding force, but then it's are you really doing it for you, or are you really doing it because an external beauty standard tells you that that is what you need to look like? By whose standards? Because what if the world was a place where age was honored in the same way that youth was for women in terms of beauty? Would we all be trying to make ourselves look older? I think that's a question to ask. And of course, we don't like live in this vacuum where we're not exposed to these things. So of course, we're going to be influenced by them. And yeah, and I think a lot of people are not going to that depth of thinking or feeling, but that's okay as well.
Yeah. And this is this like, I think this is the idea of like this clinging. It's almost like we need to cling, and we cling to something when we feel scared, or fearful of change. But clinging is like resisting life in some way. I remember actually when I was doing my pregnancy yoga teacher training, Sherry Lathy, who ran the course, she was absolutely amazing. I was fairly young when I was doing that. So I was in like very early 20s, had no idea about pregnancy or any of that. I just wanted to feel comfortable when somebody pregnant walked into my class. But she said something that stayed with me forever. And she said that anxiety is essentially a fear of letting go of the old self. And I remember, and she was explaining that in terms of pregnancy, because obviously everything changes, and you see people coming into class really trying to cling on to their old self. Like they want to do the same power yoga, they want to do the handstands, the headstands, all of this stuff. And she's like, it's a clinging to the old self. And the sooner we can practice letting go and embracing the new self, the easier life becomes. And I think a lot of it, if that is that, I think a lot of it is letting go and not a clinging, because clinging is to resist life. Many of life's lessons are and beauties are like missed when we cling things. And so it's this idea of like pleasurable experiences inevitably change. And with that comes this element of loss and being okay with that, because the pleasure will leave, and what happens is then we cling to that pleasurable experience again. So it's this idea that like looking for pleasure and avoiding pain, like that has never been a spiritual path, right? They both keep a human being at that level of like grasping for the pleasurable and rejecting what isn't pleasurable, but that's all about the external world. So this is that illusion that we attain happiness by rejecting what produces suffering and embracing like pleasure, but really so much growth is in suffering, isn't it? And I think this is actually something that I find really difficult, and I think in my journey has been something that I've wrestled with, and I've seen it in other people, is that sometimes we can start like this spiritual journey, and a bit like that pendulum we said before, can become quite extreme in it. And I definitely did that. So, at one point I was going to become a monk because I decided that, well, what happened was when how did I come to be a monk? When I left the corporate world, I was like a bit judgmental. I was like, God, these people don't get life. Like I get life now.
Spiritual ego kicking in there.
Right, isn't it funny? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be a psychologist and try and help all these people who are very, very confused. How patronizing. And I did my psychology training. Then I was like, hang on, I think there's something in yoga. So did the yoga training. So got this yoga psychology thing going on. It was a lot about thinking and really going deep, 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 deep. And lots of thinking. Say that again. There was so much thinking. And then I was trying to get into meditation, not surprisingly, because I was obviously overthinking everything. And so went to meditation classes in Worcester, actually, at one of their university classes, and it was led by a monk called Ketchok. And it was basically about not thinking. And I was like, hang on a minute. I've studied a lot on psychology and thinking, and I really feel like I've mastered this now. And yet here I am, and now I'm being taught to basically stop thinking or think less. So I was like, right, well, the next level of that is a monk. So I'm going to become a monk because that must be the highest version of self. And it probably is. However, thankfully I had a conversation with Keshok, and he was like, you don't need to do that. And it was great. That was a really important conversation, because he was like, you can help people. He said, this morning I was in Lidl and I passed somebody a courgette and that made them happy. You can help people any which way. You don't actually need to become a monk to do that. And why I'm saying that is because I guess, first of all, there's this, right, attachment to pleasure and avoidance of pain. Okay, got that right, step one. But then it was like, okay, so I'll go into the pain and I'll grow. Okay, but then I was like so in the growing and so in the pain that actually this phrase that I often use is like, I started picking at scabs. It was just like, I was okay until I started going deep in these areas and then destabilizing myself. And actually, I found it's really important to also have fun, to also come out of it with some lightness and go, yeah, there's balance here. Okay, life doesn't have to be so serious. Like, we love depth. I love this stuff. And in my wisdom, I've also gone, it's also really important to bring a lightness to this and like maybe come up for air every now and then. So again, I think it's that, like, we play with the, the polar ends of the spectrum, don't we? And I think when we can come from maybe not having such a spiritual life, diving into it and then going, whoa, like maybe that's not balanced either, and meeting somewhere in the middle. So I think attachment to pleasure, yeah, not great. I think definitely don't avoid pain because there's lots of growth in it. I wouldn't get attached to pain either, because that's, do you know what I mean? That's also, there's no balance in that. So I think it is totally about balance. Do what you want and try and be truthful with yourself in the process in terms of why you're really doing it. Is there an attachment there? Is there a need to be doing it? I do think that's very difficult. I think it's really difficult these days, and I'll speak from I on that, to hear what is our own voice and what is somebody else's, culture's voice. Because if you said to me, why do you get your nails done? Why do you get your hair done? I'd go, because it feels good. And I've tried not doing it and I felt a bit crap, and I do lots of self-exploratory work and it just made me feel better, and that was it. Probably if we dug deeper in there, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be doing that stuff, but that's where I sit and that's where I'm comfortable in this lifetime. So maybe it's also about just making conscious choices, being awake and deciding consciously rather than just sleepwalking and copying what everybody else does. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Like, live life consciously, make everything you do a conscious decision, because then you're living life, aren't you? You're living in the present moment. And if there's one thing yoga's ever going to teach you, it's like there is no moment but the moment that you're in, because the past is the past and you're not in the future yet. You only have this moment. So if you can apply that mentality of just making conscious choices about, the media that you consume, that maybe then informs like how you feel about your appearance, curating your social media feed so that it is around things that actually make you feel good and don't make you feel like you're not enough, and I think that's easy as well when you're in the world of yoga, and especially when you first start your teaching journey and like maybe you're looking for inspiration and there's like all these people doing yoga on the beach in bikinis and you're like, yeah, they're like, I can't do that pose, and but then you've got to come back to one of the other teachings of yoga, which is it's not about how the pose looks, it's how it feels. And what if we applied that to every area of our life, and we move through life more from a place of feeling and consciousness than being so attached to our outer appearance in the first place? And, you've heard me say this before, that if people were to do enough inner work on their, energetic systems, their chakra system, as they do on their exterior appearance, the world will be a hugely different place. And also their next lifetime would be hugely different as well, because it's from the energy of the chakra system that kind of decides, like, how evolved are we? How many lessons have we really learned? And, but you can still do the inner work without like completely walking a spiritual path of, not enjoying life and not having pleasure of food or whatever else brings you pleasure and makes you feel good as well, because we are still here to have a human experience, and we have 5 senses for a reason, right? To experience life through those senses.
Totally. I think as well, for me, a lot of this boils down to health, and maybe that's why it's easier for me to palette things like, I don't know, hair and nails, and why then things like filler and Botox and becomes a bit of a sticking point, because there are different health implications to that, and I know you will explain that better. But chemicals going into bloodstreams, I think that's why I was so worried about the steroids, because it's like hormones. I just feel like you can't mess with those. So I think health for me is really a bit of a bottom line on it. And one system that's helped me hugely with that from yoga is the sister practice of Ayurveda. And one of the things I absolutely love about that, so I think we've summarized it very briefly before, but it's essentially this idea that we have a body type, your dosha, so Vata being air or wind, and Pitta being fire, and then Kapha being earth, water. So these three types, and we could be bio or tridosha, but for simplicity, these three types, and that certain foods are better or worse for these types. And that isn't based on calorific, quantity, it couldn't be less important. For example, and I use myself as an example here. So my dosha is Vata Pitta, so I'm air or wind and also fire. And so fire, being predominantly fire, is this idea that, too much fire, so like attracts like, I like the fiery stuff, turns to ash. But the interesting part of it was that with the Vata element, I was feeling anxious a lot of the time. And luckily, the practitioner that I went to said to me, write down your journal of what you're eating and stuff like that. And because I was trying to stay slim, again, this early 20s, so really quite easily, I would say, influenced by this cultural standard. So I wanted to be thinner, and I was exercising loads, and it was very much about appearance, I would say. And so I was eating these rice cakes because I was obviously bloody starving, but I wanted low calorie. And she was like, oh, I remember her tatting, these rice cakes, why are you eating these rice cakes? And so I'd say, well, they're low calorie, is healthy snack, healthy, right? I genuinely thought I was being healthy. And she was like, look, you're Vata, okay, which is wind, and so when you get into excess and there's too much of that, then you're going to feel anxiety. That's one of the excess expressions of Vata. And you're pumping yourself with these blown up rice cakes filled with air. So you're feeling more and more anxious. And by the way, your Pitta, your fire, what happens when you throw a load of air into fire? Whoomp, it goes up. And so you're getting all this redness, irritation, because you're literally adding fuel to the fire through the air. And I was just like, oh my God, this whole time I thought I was being healthy, right? And yet healthy by some calorific standard, which was so disconnected from me, my body type. Things like tomatoes, healthy, not great for Pitta because they're acidic. So it's get to know yourself, get to know your body. And the framework around Ayurveda is amazing. I love that. I always show one presentation in teacher training. There's one slide and it's got these three body types. So it's got Pitta, Vata, and then Kapha. And so when you look at Pitta, it's like an athletic build, medium athletic build, okay? Then you've got Vata, and it's a slim build, and it's got kind of wiry hair, right? Thin. And then you've got Kapha, which is thicker set, okay? A wider build. And it's as simple as that, right? There is no better or worse. It's this is your dosha. This is your body type. This is you in balance, at ease, at complete health. Three different types, you're going to look very different from each other, and neither are better or worse. And here's what happens if you are in deficiency on one or in excess in, out of balance. Your body's going to throw disease. You can't be Kapha and try and look like Pitta because you're going to experience disease. Likewise, the other way around. It's about acceptance of our body types. And I always use that example when I was in Thailand on my gap year. and we're rafting, as you do, classic. And there was two rafts, and there was all these Westerners, right? So there's Londoners, there's all the Americans, and these Thai guys going, right, okay, they're trying to balance the raft. That's all they're trying to do with the weight. So they're just looking at this group of Westerners going, right, fat one there, thin one there, fat one there. And you could just see these Westerners just dying inside. They didn't care because it didn't matter, because it doesn't matter what size your body is. And they were just literally, it was the same as going tall or short, fat or thin, who bloody cares? And I just loved that. It was such a breath of fresh air once I'd been allocated. It was why can't it be that simple? Why does it matter? And it's a shame really that we've got to the point where it matters so much that, this surgical intervention that's going on is terrifying really.
Yeah, I think it's so simple, isn't it, when you use that system and you're just, you're this or you're that. And without any judgment or any attachment or any hierarchy. You just are what you are. And yeah, like you touched on kind of the Botox thing earlier, and I think it is something we should speak into, because for me it's like a topic you can easily avoid, because yeah, it's probably going to upset a lot of people if you say, oh, you shouldn't be having Botox. And and I know, yeah, like it's probably approved by the FDA and things like that, but then at least 30% of the drugs out in the world get recalled by the FDA. And how do we really know the long-term effects of it? And I speak from a place of having tried Botox, and I hated it. I hated it for two reasons. And the first reason was really to go into what we talked about earlier, which is the frequency and the vibration behind why I was having it in the first place. And I really kind of did some work around that afterwards, because yeah, I was doing it from a place of trying to meet a standard. Perhaps there was stuff around getting older for me that was coming up, and yeah, like instead of trying to run from being older, you were talking about this concept of clinging earlier. That really, what is wrong with getting older? What is wrong with it? What is wrong with looking older? Why is it so frowned upon? Or, there's like literally, that reaction in your body that's like, oh, I don't want to look older, or, oh, I've got wrinkles, or whatever it is. Why do we have that reaction? It's because of this beauty standard that exists that tells us we need to look a certain way. And it's everything I don't stand for. I want to be about authenticity, and I want to be someone that challenges the perceptions of aging, not feeding into a system that says we have to look a certain way. So that was one reason that I hated it. And then I think the second reason, I don't feel like it made me look any better, actually. Yeah, like it got rid of some wrinkles that I had in my forehead, but then I couldn't move my eyebrows, and my kids were still quite young. And you read stuff about this, that how important the expression on your face is, especially for young children. And are we going to grow up with children that are kind of emotionally stunted because they can't pick up on expression on their mother's faces? And then we've got like filters and things like that, which is, is a whole nother rabbit hole you could go down. And yeah, so I really sat with it and decided, what, like I've tried it and it's not for me. So I think, I am speaking from an embodied place and a place of non-judgment. It's my experience. And I also started to research some of the effects of Botox longer term. And, I'm not a scientist, but like everything in my being says it's a toxin that you're putting in your body that you do not need to put into your body. So why would you do it in order to just not have wrinkles when you are the age that you are? And why can't we just be okay with that? And my path is not everyone's path, and that's okay too.
Yeah, it's such a tough one, isn't it? Like we're laughing because I thought I always have this really weird thing. It's happening less now as I'm genuinely getting a bit older. But I think for a long time, because I think firstly because I'm the youngest. I'm still saying I'm the youngest in the family. I'm not. I've got 1-year-old, but I was right the youngest sibling, so I felt like this young thing all the time. And like that was a problem really, because in like the workplace and stuff, I always feel like, oh God, I'm not old enough for that. It's definitely a problem when I had children, because I was definitely not old enough for that. And I think maybe more people feel this than they talk about. But yeah, I was saying maybe when I get to that age, I'm in my mid 30s. I know a lot of people younger than me are having Botox now. I might feel like I want it, and I still might try it. I'm not against trying these things. I'm against needing them. I'm against being attached to them, but I'm always so curious, how will I react? How will I feel about it? And exploring that. So yeah, again, for me, Yeah, health is a big one, and what you've said about, chemicals getting into bloodstreams and things like that, to me, it's huge. I find it really hard to ignore that, but I think also it's the needing it, which is the really dangerous thing. So yeah, where do we land? Where do we land on it, Beck?
I think Eastern philosophy has a really beautiful perspective on getting older. And in Chinese medicine, like menopause and sort of being like 50 and beyond is said to be like your second spring. It's a time when your hormones are changing. And the changes mean like we no longer have that kind of inner desire that's there for a lot of women to mother, to have a baby. And there's kind of research coming out now that shows like that can actually be for an issue for women having babies like later in life. Maybe they're right at the end of being fertile, they have a baby, but then their hormones change and they actually don't have that desire to mother the baby that they have in the same way. And that's like a really interesting topic. But, when we do stop bleeding and we stop having our monthly cycles, what's changing within us is we're able to keep that life force energy that's lost through the menstrual cycle, and we can use it to step into our power. And I think this is a much more beautiful way to look at aging and getting older than what we're taught to believe about it. And the only thing that you'll get told if you go to the doctor or seek advice through the mainstream is just take HRT and get on with it. And what is that HRT doing? And again, I'm not speaking from a place of judgment, and I've also tried HRT, is like, yeah, stick a plaster on your bum and get on with life, because you're too busy and you need to do all these things and you can't afford to like have the downtime that all these symptoms bring. When really what we're meant to be doing is slowing down and noticing, what's going on for us. Where are we not on path? Where have we got more life force to give? And I think when we can embrace perimenopause and menopause as like a physical, mental, emotional and spiritual change that's happening for us to help us evolve into the next version of ourselves, that's when things will change. And yeah, like HRT can be right for some people. And, I'm not sort of judging or saying that that's not the case. But for me, yeah, my journey has been one of, trying to find like the gold in it, really. So, yeah, and I think aging is such a big part of perfectionism, and that we should kind of stay the same as whatever we think the perfect age that we looked perfect, whatever that is for you or me, that we should look the same. And that's just not the case. And something else that I just wanted to mention, actually, we touched on this before the call when we were chatting, was like the natural world doesn't offer us many opportunities to look at ourselves. We weren't designed to look at our own reflection, our own appearance. We were designed to look at other people and meet their gaze and meet them with empathy and compassion and understanding through our facial expressions. And of course, now society, we have like cameras on our phones and we're taking selfies and we're talking to camera. I do all of these things as well for Instagram and whatever, but there's much more, you're facing yourself in the mirror or on a camera a lot more. And I think the impact of that is huge as well. So I think all of these things that we're experiencing are like normal because we're faced with our own image and then comparing that to some false standard. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see kind of where that goes as time goes on, I think.
I think interesting and also terrifying, when you've got kids as well that are they're stepping into this world. I mean, Lenny's 4 today, and in a blink of an eye, we all know he'll be 14. And what does that look like? I mean, boys image now. I think there's so many eating disorders within men, you know, so many more. And again, it's just like feeling like they need to look a certain way. And I feel like it's only going to get worse. And that's why I think like doing work like this is really, really important. You know, we spoke about before, like asmita, one of the kleshas, the toxins of the mind in yoga is, asmita is the more I make the world about me, the more stressful it becomes. And the poison, the disease that comes with that, you know, a selfie is literally it. It's taking a photo of the self, you know, the more you make the world about you, the more stressful it becomes. And these people are feeling it, you know, that this stress of it being so focused on self and what we look like and all of that, that really it's got to be a practice of letting that go, you know. And cutting the tree, you know, the kleshas, they call it the tree of kleshas, and then the trunk of it being this avidya, which is this spiritual ignorance. So if you can avoid spiritual ignorance, then you're going to save yourself a lot of time of all these other poisons. So for me, the way out of this, I mean, it sounds really probably OTT, but is spirituality, is connection, is conversations like this that, you know, kind of make people go, oh God, yeah, like it's just not about that stuff. And kind of open yourself up into a world, a bigger world, you know, a more connected world. So yeah, hopefully we can keep spreading the word on stuff like this and save that suffering, which, you know, is really coming fast at us.
Yeah. And to kind of weave a little bit of astrology into this, I think, you know, we've talked about it before, like with astrology, you've kind of chosen this point in time to be incarnated, or the planets are in a certain place in the sky, and that's also going to impact on your physical appearance, but also your relationship to yourself. So, you know, there are certain placements that can impact that. So if you've got challenging aspects, I don't know, like the moon represents our emotional needs and habits. So if your moon is in a sign like Cancer, which is like a really nurturing, but it's a comfort seeking sign, like maybe you are going to emotionally eat more. So, you know, I think having that awareness then that, okay, you know, I have this emotional need. How else can I meet that emotional need? It's because it's going to be bigger in some people that need to kind of self-soothe and make yourself feel better, especially during times of like stress. You know, our last episode was around stress. Then you can put the strategies in place in order to deal with that. And, you know, Venus is the planet that really represents like self-worth and body image. So if you've got Venus in a hard aspect to something like Saturn or Pluto or even Uranus, this can create body image issues or feelings of inadequacy that can come up. And that, again, that can manifest as comfort eating or eating disorders or neglecting self-care or even like that punishment thing, you know. So I think also when you look at things through the lens of your birth chart and you can see, okay, like this is what I'm working with. How can I make sure I'm meeting the needs of, you know, like the planets, which are just aspects of self? Then you can put the strategies in place, like, you know. So yes, like spirituality and astrology, I'm sure a lot of people think it's woo-woo, but you know, you can also look at it through this lens of being very strategic, which is definitely like the way I do things. For me, I've got Uranus very close to Venus, and that means, you know, it means that I talk the way I talk about body image, because Uranus wants liberation and it wants freedom and it's got an unconventional view on things. But it also meant growing up that I didn't at all see myself as beautiful, and I've definitely battled with a lot of the things that we talked about earlier on. And it's only through this kind of spiritual path that I found peace and acceptance with the way that I look, and realized, yeah, it's like, in a way, the least important thing about me. Yes, health is important. I think we have an obligation, a moral obligation to look after the body that we're in. And we've talked about that as well in terms of like alignment and chakras and things like that in yoga. but the cells in our body, we want them to vibrate at a good frequency for health, but also for how we feel, and then, you know, how we exit this life as well. Yeah.
I think that is a good place to leave it, because the wisdom of astrology is always, I think, above a lot of this stuff. And that's at least what I've learned, is that, you know, psychology, we can kind of think our way out of it, we can reason it, it's a really helpful tool. Same with yoga, it will bring us the peace, and will, you know, minimize these unhealthy coping mechanisms for maybe not feeling content. But ultimately, when you can see your path and you can see, you know, where your planets are and your tendencies, you've then got a lot more wisdom as to how to know what to expect, and then how to manage them, you know, through the tools that we've discussed. So perfect way to end, I think, Beck.
Yeah. It was great talking.
Okay, so thank you for listening, everybody, and we look forward to sharing more with you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Your time is precious, and we truly appreciate you spending it with us. We look forward to having you join us again soon. So, take care, and we'll catch you in the next episode.